Discussing considering a Religious Discrimination Act. With me now is Labor MP Ed Husic. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon. Look, you spoke after Labor's election loss about the need for the Labor Party, to reconnect with Australians of faith. Tell me then about your approach in light of that election result, particularly in places like Western Sydney, to the prospect of a Religious Discrimination Act.
I think people had been saying to me for a while that they just wanted to know that they'd be able to express their faith and subscribe to their, obviously support their faith, and that there would be those freedoms in that way. There are other trickier things in the discussions I've had, particularly around employment law and the way in which people are hired and treated through the course of their employment, which are things that are going to need to be dealt with sensitively. And it's clear that people do want to have that assurance, and we want to support people being able to express and follow their faith from our side of politics, but we also got to be able to do things in a way that respects the views of others, and finding that balance is really important, and I think we've just got to keep working through that.
It is difficult finding that balance because you're right. People want to protect their right to hold their religious views. People probably want to also protect, well, tell me what you think, the right of a Jewish, Islamic or Christian school to hire who they want. Would you be worried if a religious discrimination law meant that a Jewish school had to hire people who weren't of that faith?
Well, a lot of the schools do actually hire people from different faith backgrounds, and I've seen that myself in the electorate I represent. So, there is that. I think the big concern is, and this is the intersection with the Folau case, I'll have faith-based schools that say, look, we're happy to hire people from different backgrounds, but we need to know that for the parents that send their kids to these schools expressly on the basis that they're going to a faith-based institution where they'll get their education but do so along the lines of the faith, that what's taught to them will be in line with that. Now, for example, if you take the Israel Folau matter, if someone who doesn't have a faith, an atheist, goes into a school and starts saying that the faith that people are practicing within that school, that they shouldn't be doing it, there's no point in doing it, how do you manage the employment law element of that in that type of school? And this is the thing that a lot of Conservatives who jumped on the Israel Folau matter, there is an intersection here that is very difficult between employment law and religious freedoms. The government says that they can reconcile this and that they can walk the fine line through this. It'll be interesting to see what's done. I understand that the government, while they've done a lot of consulting of their own backbench, have not yet consulted our side of policy. I stand to be corrected. If they have, great. But there hasn't been much consultation, and will be interesting to see what Christian Porter comes out, if he does make the announcement today about what they've done, because I don't think the consultation's been that thorough.
I think he's consulted some religious groups. He's been criticised for not consulting perhaps gay rights groups. But just cutting to the core of this, Ed Husic, do you think there's a need... Sorry, David, the point I wanted to make is they haven't necessarily consulted the Labor Party on this, and if you want to work through a contentious issue. So, yeah. Apologies, you were saying something. Cutting to the core, is there a need for a law here at all?
Well, that is a very good... as always, David Spears, you always ask the good questions. And that simple questions are very... Well, it's a simple question to ask and a hard one to answer, because for a lot of people, they feel, particularly from a faith-based background, that they want to be able to practice their faith, and that there's some sort of feeling that they won't be able to do so. And I always assure people, well, that certainly is the case. No one stopped you to now, and no one's going to stop you from this point forward. And I think answering that type of very straightforward question you ask, it'll be critical to see, or the answer will be provided in large part by what the government is actually going to ultimately release. They've been talking about this for a while.
And that's a fair point. You need to see what they're actually going to bowl up. I get that. But from where you sit right now, it doesn't sound like you're convinced there needs to be a new law here.
I think, well, there's an issue between law and an issue between what a society is encouraging, how we encourage people to be able to live their lives, people of faith to be able to celebrate their faith, people who aren't necessarily religious or who act in a way that people from a faith-based background don't necessarily subscribe to. Being able to create the spaces for people to live their lives, I think, is ultimately something that we should encourage, not just on a rules-based or legal-based framework. It is something that societies and communities should be encouraging. And, regardless of what the law, while they'll provide important protections, it is important that we be able to find the balance, and that we as individuals and parliamentarians have a role to play, media has a role to play, others in the community have a role to play, to say you can celebrate your faith, but we also got to do it in a way that respects the views of others, and finding that balance is really important.
In terms of the politics here, are you worried, particularly given what happened at the election, are you worried that Labor could end up being further wedged here when it comes to protecting religious views?
I don't really, if I can be absolutely blunt to you, I don't really care about that. From my point of view, David,
right.
There's a bigger issue here about being able to, as I said, create space for people to be able to live their lives, for people of faith to be able to do so, and for others to be able to, get the job that they want and do the right thing by the way that they live their lives. I think that's really important. The pressures we have in communities here and abroad is the desire to pull each other apart in camps. I come from a Balkan background. I can tell you, Balkanised societies, there are some good things about them, but there have been some challenging things. Finding ways to get people working together is the big political challenge of our time, at a time where it seems that the pressure is to push or drive people apart.
Let me turn to another matter. We've been talking a lot, of course, for a couple of months now about Hong Kong and the protests there. Really interesting development by Twitter,
yes,
and Facebook to a degree as well. And you've got some expertise in this space of the social media giants and what they've done. So Twitter has removed nearly 1,000 accounts and suspended 200,000 others. It believes they're linked to a campaign by the Chinese state against the protesters. Twitter says, quote, covert manipulative behaviours have no place on our service. They violate the fundamental principles on which our company is built. Do you welcome that? And what do you make of that?
Well, there hasn't been much reason to welcome a lot of what social media has been doing, but this is a very important development, as you point out. And in Twitter's case, as you say, and in the blog post that they put up describing what they did, which I'd encourage your viewers to go and read. I don't recall that they actually mentioned a country, David, but they did say a state-based player was involved, and 1,000 of those accounts pulled down. Facebook taking down, again, I'll stand corrected, Facebook saying that they've taken down a number of pages which had, about 15,000 or tens of thousands of followers.
It's a handful in the case of Facebook. But look, it's interesting because they don't respond to a lot of the criticism. Yeah, you go.
Well, I was just going to say, what was interesting in the Twitter case is Twitter is blocked in China. And the way in which some people had accessed Twitter was to use virtual private networks, which I understand as well, were also being banned in China. And some of the accounts, Liberty Line News was one account that was supposedly based offshore and used a number of hashtags. Some of them used hashtags like Trump, MAGA, Conservative, and what they were doing, these accounts, were praising the police, condemning the protesters, and raising questions about whether there'd been Western influence while being based offshore. And so Twitter has taken the step, and I absolutely congratulate them on taking the step. If people are abusing the social media platforms to foment discontent, as we have seen over the years, using Twitter and Facebook, then it's important this action happen, and they've got to be congratulated in doing so.
A final one for you, Ed Husic, before I let you go. A lot of politicians, again, talking today about Alan Jones. The Greens want him sacked. Pauline Hanson says he's done nothing wrong. Media Watch last night revealed it wasn't just the shove the sock down her throat comment about Jacinda Ardern, but he also said, I hope Scott Morrison gets tough here with a few backhanders in relation to Jacinda Ardern. What do you think of that sort of remark? You
just don't... That's just... Well, Scott Morrison, he said it the other week, and I don't find myself on the same page as Scott Morrison often, but when he did describe it as out of line, he's absolutely right. There's got to be a better way to express. Alan Jones has got particularly strong views on the issue of climate change, understand that. But in expressing views, we do have to be mindful that our words do carry, particularly in the public square, and particularly someone in Alan's case. And I just don't agree with that phrasing whatsoever, and can understand why sponsors have taken an equally hard, well, not advertisers, I should say, have taken an equally hard line withdrawing their money there. Again, we've got to pick our words. Some of the words that Alan has used are just plain wrong, and we've got to be a lot more judicious about the way we express our views. I don't agree with Alan Jones's views on climate change, and he sure as heck won't agree with my views. But in doing so, we've got to be able to express ourselves in a way that has respect for people. And I just think the stuff that was said in the last few days is just wrong.